Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome once again to Cracking Addiction. And today we have with us Celeste Yvonne. Now Celeste has written a book called It's Not About the Wine. Welcome Celeste, tell us about your book.
Hi Fergal, thank you so much for having me. So I wrote this book as part memoir. In fact, I think originally when I wrote it, the intention was for it to be a memoir, just my journey, how I quit drinking and how I stay sober. But as I wrote it, so many themes started coming out, things I wanted to explore with other women's stories, with research, with things I was seeing culturally. And out of that came this book, which is part memoir, it's part research, and it's part inspiring stories of how other women, how other mothers have quit drinking and stayed sober. And I'm really proud of what's come out of it.
Yeah, I've read your book and I agree it is inspiring. And there are so many themes to draw out. I was wondering if we could focus today on your story. I mean, there's so much of your story that I think that other people can relate to. So I think in the early part of your book, you describe your battles with weight and your battles with eating disorder and your relationship with your father and mother. I mean, would you be able to discuss a little bit about that?
Yeah, I grew up in a home of addiction. My father was an alcoholic. And in a lot of ways, I thought that would protect me from creating and developing the same problems he had. But what
Why do
I,
you say that?
well, because I saw the mistakes he made. And I thought with that firsthand insight, I could avoid them myself. It seemed like if I avoided doing life and drinking alcohol the way he drank, I could still enjoy alcohol. I could still live life on my terms. And that, in part, that was me trying to stay independent. And I believed in my heart that I was a different person than him and I would do life differently than he did. I would not make the same mistakes he did. But what I realized pretty quickly, or what I can look back on now and see, is I took probably the same obsession he had towards alcohol and I steered it towards food and eating issues pretty early on. And that consumed me from
So
a young
did
age.
the eating come before the alcohol?
Absolutely. I think I started
Yeah, yeah.
with dieting and uh, obsessing about my weight as early
Yeah.
as probably age 11.
So your mother, there's one section in your book where you talk about how your mother reluctantly introduced you to Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig. How old were you at that time?
I was probably 11 or 12 years old when I went on
11
my
or 12 years
first
old.
Weight Watchers diet.
Yeah. What was the thinking for you at that time? Can you remember?
Yeah, I felt fat. My parents had always told me I was big boned. And I saw the other girls in my classroom, my friends, and they were thinner than me. And keep in mind, this was also the time of heroin chic, on the runways, and the supermodels gracing the covers of 17 magazine were stick thin, and I was not. And that was very clear to me. So I think from that age, my thought was, I'm different from them. I want to be more like them. What do I have to do to make that happen?
That's so sad, but it's so prevalent, isn't it, that view? What do I have to do to fit in? I have to change my body. Right. Looking back now, I mean, if you had a friend whose daughter was feeling that way, would you introduce them to Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers in the 5th grade?
No, not at all. I think at the time my mom thought she was helping me fit in. There's a term for this now that's called an almond mom. And it's a mom that kids grow up watching. They're constantly obsessing about their weight. They're always on a diet. They're counting how many almonds they're having. And when you grow up in a home like that, it seems pretty normal that you're going to be pretty obsessed about how much you're consuming each day too. So inadvertently, her journey became my journey. And I really took it and ran with it. I took probably what was a small obsession on her part, and I made it a big obsession on my part.
And all the while this was happening, your father had issues with alcohol, didn't he?
Yes. And he was always just this really happy, charismatic drunk. Everyone loved him. He was high functioning until he wasn't, which was when I was 15. I was a freshman in high school, and he had a stroke and became permanently disabled after that, and went from being my hero to what I felt was just an embarrassment overnight. I was deeply ashamed. I was angry with him. I believed it was all his fault because of the way he drank. And I stopped talking to him for a few years. I was so furious with him. But all the while, my obsession with my eating and my weight just continually ramped up over those years.
Because again, you were feeling very self-conscious because you had a father who wasn't able to fulfill the role that you expected of him after his illness.
I think when I look back on it now, it was a way for, yes, me to distract myself from a lot of heavy emotions. And we lived in a home where we didn't talk about feelings. We certainly didn't speak openly about my father's drinking problem. It was a really dark time in our entire family's life, as my dad was now disabled and still even more focused than ever on drinking and living the same life he lived prior to the stroke.
You said something that really triggered me. You said he was a functioning alcoholic until he wasn't. I mean, I debate this frequently with my colleagues. Is there such a thing as a functioning alcoholic? What do you think?
I would say, from my own firsthand experience and watching my father, I think you can be a functioning alcoholic, depending on how you define alcoholic and depending on how you define functioning.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of depends in there.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, whilst your father was a functioning alcoholic, I mean, he was still able to run a business, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But, was he present in your life during his time as when he was drinking like that?
He was. In some ways, he was always at my sporting events. I played volleyball up until my eating disorder consumed me so much. I didn't have energy to do anything. But he was heavily involved in my sporting events and coaching on my teams and watching me play. That was, in a lot of ways, one of the few things we could connect on, because he was very passionate about sports as well. In other ways, he was very distant. He had his own man cave. I feel like before man caves were even a widespread thing. And he was always in that room drinking beer, watching sports, and isolating himself from the rest of the family.
So he might have been more present had he not been drinking.
Yeah, I think we would have been a lot closer if he wasn't so focused on alcohol and drinking. But I'm also appreciative that he wasn't being so blatantly drunk in front of us all the time. Like he did separate himself in those times of the day where he probably was drunk. So we didn't have to witness it.
And so then you went to Scandinavia. Was it Sweden or Norway?
It was Sweden.
Sweden. Stockholm. Yes, I
I
remember
was
Stockholm now.
I was outside of Stockholm for a month doing a peace exchange with another girl who was 16 years old. I was 16 at the time. And I had drunk before, but it was my first time getting drunk, where we went to a house party. We rode our bikes there. It all was so innocent until it wasn't. And I just let loose. The alcohol made me feel alive. It made me feel unafraid. It made me feel like I could be the person that I couldn't be in real life. And I kept thinking, if I feel so good right now, what would another drink be like? And it just spiraled from there to the point that I have a lot of foggy memories from that night, except that I do recall that my exchange students' parents had to come pick us up, to drive us home. And the next day we went on the world's longest car ride to Stockholm. Yes. And I just was so sure I was going to throw up that entire trip. And I told myself I will never drink again for the 8 hours we were in that car.
Yeah. I mean, that story really resonates with other stories that I've heard, whereby people with anxiety issues, esteem issues, body image issues, relationship issues with their parents or their significant carers, that one time, that first time when they really get acquainted with alcohol, the joy, the epiphanous joy, the epiphany happens, and they realize how wonderful they feel when they really have a few drinks. It changes them and it empowers them.
It feels
Can
like,
you describe that?
It feels like for the first time, I am finally who I was always meant to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is terrifying in hindsight. Isn't it? Yeah. I mean, you think that this is the magic you have been searching for your whole life, and you finally found it, and now everything's going to change.
Yeah. When alcohol becomes your best friend, isn't it? A lot of people can remember the time when it first happened to them. And you write so powerfully in your book. You write about the tremor.
Yes, I have.
You didn't have that tremor.
And I still have it. I have hand tremors. I've had them my whole life. You know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. And I remember my parents being like, that's not going to happen. Your hands shake too much. But when I had that first drink in me, the tremor went away. And I couldn't believe it. Again, it was like I found my superpower. Like this, now that I know what I've been missing this whole time, I felt unstoppable.
Yeah. So this beautiful relationship between you and alcohol, it started out beautiful. How long did it take for it to become sour?
You know, I think the part where I really just could not keep drinking the way I was drinking was when I became a parent. Up until that point, I felt like this is sustainable. This is something that I can do. And I can continue to drink the way I like to drink. And I wasn't impacting others. But when I became a parent, it became very clear very quickly that not only was that lifestyle unsustainable, but the impacts I would be having on people other than myself were significant.
Can you give us some examples of that impact?
Yeah, when I think about waking up with a hangover and having a baby to take care of, the anxiety and the intrusive thoughts and the frustration and even just terror of how am I supposed to do this? I can't do this. I'm not competent. I'm not a good mother. It was very hard for me to get through the early months of raising a child with so much pressure. Everything's on the line. A child's counting on me to live. And I can't even get out of this hangover that's sitting on me for hours at a time every morning. It made me realize that I could either keep drinking the way I like to drink, or I can be the mom I wanted to be, but I could not do both.
Yeah. Your friend was a very selfish friend. There's no space for any other duties, was there?
Yeah, I think when a kid enters the picture, alcohol does not feel like a friend anymore. It feels like it wants all your attention. When I kind of hit that time in my life where I felt like I needed to choose, a lot of it came down to energy. I just did not have the energy to navigate the mental load of drinking and hangovers and also parent my children. It just seemed to come down to something as simple as, where do I want to put my energy?
What about work at the time? I mean, how did you're a professional marketeer, you hold down a responsible job. I mean, how did alcohol impact upon your ability to work at that time?
I worked in a business that had a pretty toxic drinking culture. Hangovers amongst myself or my colleagues weren't necessarily a negative thing. It was just par for the course. And in afternoons, it wasn't all that unusual for somebody to pop open a beer at their desk, or for us to even have parties out in the warehouse. So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with being high functioning. I think if you are surrounding yourself with other people who are doing similar things as you and acting similarly, it's really easy to fit in and not feel like you're doing anything outside of the norm.
There's that theme of fitting in again, isn't it?
Oh, always.
Yeah. So I mean, I've heard a lot of stories, and yet, and also your story also reaches a tipping point when you finally realize that you've had it. Tell us about that, if you will.
Yeah. I had so many convincing moments leading up to it, moments where I started questioning, is this sustainable? I started questioning, how can I keep doing this when my anxiety is getting worse and worse? A lot of specific moments that made me go, maybe this isn't the right direction, but I didn't quit yet. But it was actually on just kind of a boring Monday in December after a weekend of a whole bunch of holiday parties that I went into work, sat down at my desk, was checking email, and I had a panic attack. And it was, for anybody who's had a panic attack, it's very scary. Your heart's racing. You start cold sweating. My body was trembling. And my first thought when it happened was, something's wrong. And what if I'm having a stroke just like my father? And I was not having a stroke. I was having a panic attack. But that fear that put in me was enough for me to say, I need to try something different. And I have to do it now. Because if I keep going the direction I'm going to reach a point where I'm drinking the way my dad was drinking. And I saw firsthand there was no going back for him. And I can't do that to myself. I can't do that to my children. I don't want to do that. I don't want to live that way. So I blindly quit drinking that day not really knowing what I was doing or how I was going to do it, but knowing that I'm going to just have to figure it out as I go.
But you said something to your mother, didn't you,
I told my
that day?
mom, yeah, I went to the ER, when I first thought I was having a stroke. And as we were sitting in the waiting room, I asked my mom to come meet me there, and she did. And that's the first time I've ever told anybody. I said, I think I have a drinking problem. And
That's a very powerful admission, isn't it?
I knew when I said it, there'd be no turning back. Like, my mom lived with an alcoholic for most of her life. I would never be able to take those words back to her. She would take it seriously. It would be the start of a very different direction in my life. So I realized, the words I was saying were significant, but I knew they had to be said now. I couldn't wait any longer. And then that night I told my husband, and, I think I made it pretty casual. I said something to the effect of, I went to the hospital today. I think I have to quit drinking. And that was kind of the extent of it. I don't think I knew what else to say, and I don't think he really knew what to make of it. So he just kind of respectfully said, okay. And he has supported me ever since. But gosh, it was an awkward conversation.
It is, isn't it? It's when you have to confront the truth, and also you have to confront the truth with your nearest and dearest. It can be a barrier for people. Now, you find it. I mean, you in your book you describe how your difficulties in those early stages, and you also describe your first holiday sober in Mexico, I believe it was.
My first holiday, the first week I was sober was actually the week of Christmas. But I have to remember, in Australia, when you say holiday, you mean vacation. You don't mean
Vacation.
Christmas.
I beg your pardon. Your
No, it's
first
okay.
vacation was.
My first vacation. Now, this was something my husband and I had been planning for a while. It was our 5-year wedding anniversary, and we had planned it to be at an all-inclusive in Cancun. There were even, there's going to be so much alcohol at this place. There were even liquor dispensers in the rooms. So when I quit drinking that December, I knew that this vacation was looming, and I just didn't know what the answer was. Like, could I maybe take a break from being sober for this 1 week so I could enjoy our vacation? And I was terrified. I did not know what a vacation sober would look like. What would it feel like? Would it even be a vacation if I don't have a pina colada in my hands? But when I got there, when I was on vacation, I did commit to my sobriety. And it was a beautiful, powerful experience. I was able to wake up early in the mornings and work out. I was able to enjoy moments with my husband and do things I never would have done if I had been drinking. I didn't have the raging anxiety that I normally do when I'm traveling on an airplane. And just having so many moments to reflect and be present was really a first-time experience for me on a vacation like that. And when I got home from that vacation, I felt like I was so much stronger than I ever gave myself credit for, because I got through that week where alcohol was everywhere, and I got through it sober. And I think after that moment, I really did have this moment where I said, I can do this. Like, I could do this long term, and it'll be worth it.
Now, you said something that really I find very interesting. You said just a couple of minutes ago, you said, I wondered if I could I wondered if I should take a break from sobriety for a week so that I could enjoy my vacation. That fear of being excluded from functions, from society, where and identifying that society is dependent and fun is dependent on alcohol is a big barrier, isn't it?
It's huge. And I feel like that's a barrier most people have when they first realize they need to quit. This worry that they won't fit in, or they'll lose their friends, or they won't be fun anymore, or they won't even have fun anymore. Because what does fun look like when alcohol's not involved? I feel like for so long, I lost connection with what it even means to be alive when I don't have a drink in my hand. Like, who am I if I'm not drinking alcohol and partying under the influence? So it really is, especially in that first year, being sober is such an exploration of understanding who you are. And kind of going back to your childhood roots. Like, what did you love doing as a child? What are you passionate about? I mean, these things start to shift and change when you quit drinking. And it's a little scary at first, because I think everyone has that fear deep down. What if nothing's enjoyable? And what I learned is most things are even more enjoyable when you're sober. And the things that probably just aren't fun to begin with, if you need alcohol to have them be fun at all.
So you've got a message of hope in your book. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up now. We're running out of time, but I would love to explore the message of hope that you've got in your book in another episode. So I'd love to have you back on the show. But for now, I want to thank you for sharing your story. Celeste Yvonne, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fergal. This was fun.
That's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.